Leaving Edinburgh early in the morning, we travelled south through the snow-covered country to Jedburgh Woolen Mills. We stopped at the woolen mills for some shopping and browsing in the store. This was to be our last stop inside Scotland, as the English border was only a few miles south of here. Despite the fact that the woolen mills were very prominent in this area, it seems the chief industry here is the manufacture of rayon. This was our only stop in the town, so we focused a few shots in the immediate vicinity to capture the atmosphere of this small country borough on the Jed Water, a tributary of the Teviot River. There have been many variants to the name of the town, and it seems the locals frequently pronounce it as Jeddart. Jedburgh was made a royal borough in the reign of David I and received a charter from Robert I and then another in 1566. Jeddart Justice, in which a man was hanged and tried later, seems to have been generalised from a solitary fact stemming from the execution of a gang of rogues back in the time of James IV and at the instance of Sir George Home. Nevertheless, this saying became a proverb in the area.
On leaving the town, we snatched a glimpse of the ruins of Jedburgh Abbey and a local church as we passed by. "15 minutes later, we found ourselves at the English-Scottish border, and a short stop here enabled us to get a last look at the Scottish landscape. We moved on into the Northumberland National Park, where a late snowfall had left traces of snow still lying on the ground. This was England's border country, and as we travelled through, we were able to snatch a shot or two of the local sheep grazing contentedly in the fields near the roadside.
1 hour later, we came to a section of Hadrian's Wall at the Denton Hall turret. Built by the Emperor Hadrian in 122 AD, it was planned as a continuous wall from coast to coast, a distance of 80 Roman miles, or over 118 kilometres by our metric system. At every Roman mile, a mile castle was constructed, and 2 turrets were equally spaced between each mile castle. The Romans abandoned the wall in the 4th century, and nothing was done to preserve it until the 19th century. During the interim of 1400 years, it was used as a source of stone for roads, churches and sheep pens.
2.5 hours later, we arrived in the city of York, where we had a late lunch and spent the next 2 hours walking through the heart of this great city. Most of our attention was focused on an ancient shopping area known as the Shambles, a crowded little street of shops with many overhanging top stories. At the end of the Shambles, we turned into Coppergate Pavement, a much wider street, but still crowded with shops of all kinds. Many of the street names in York end with the word gate, which is the Viking name for street, York began as a fortress built by the Romans in 71 AD, but it was the Vikings who gave York its name, being a derivation from the name Jorvik or Jorvik. It was the Normans also who made this city a vital centre of government, as well as commerce and religion.
On turning into Parliament Street, we found the businesses seemed to be more upmarket than in the other streets where we had been. The street was more spacious, and it was here that the people found time for relaxation, as well as the opportunity to gather together for a time of social enjoyment and entertainment. Cycling seems to be a popular way of moving around York, judging by the large number of bikes found chained to these stands in the street. A street performer was trying hard to capture an audience, but without much luck.
A flower stall at the junction of a lane offered a colourful attraction of blooms for sale. Several young people idled away their time at a fountain in the centre of the street, while others passed by going about their daily business.
We turned into a side lane and headed past more shops towards the cathedral known as York Minster, a sight not to be missed on a visit to this city. After winding our way through several streets and crowds of shoppers and a pavement artist, the towers of the Minster finally came into view above the row of buildings in the street ahead of us. On the way we passed Guy Fawkes' house, the birthplace of Fawkes in 1570. A collaborator in the infamous gunpowder plot of 1605, Guy Fawkes, with several others, was caught before they could blow up the Parliament and King James on the 5th of November of that year.
Arriving at the south transept to the cathedral, we were faced with a magnificent rose window. The stonework dates from 1240. The original glass was added at the end of the War of Roses, but restored after being damaged in the fire of 1984. On this side of the building, too, is to be found a statue of Constantine the Great. It was here that Constantine was made Roman Emperor in 306 AD. The cathedral is commonly known as York Minster, meaning a centre of Christian teaching or ministering. The present building is the fourth on this site, and it is the largest medieval structure in the United Kingdom. The nave is the widest Gothic nave in England and was begun in 1291. The sheer scale of the great stone arches made quite an impressive sight as we walked down the aisle leading from the west entrance of the cathedral.
On reaching the end of the nave, we had another look at the rose window and the spacious interior of the south transept. Dominating the north transept is the Five Sisters window, completed around 1250. It is the largest of its kind to survive anywhere in the world. Beyond the choir, we could see the great east window, rising high above the Lady Chapel. The woodwork in the choir had to be replaced after a fire in 1829. Looking back down the nave from the choir, we were impressed by the magnificence of the work in the fine ceiling.
Leaving the minster, we look back to the western front of the building with its magnificent towers and ornamental stonework. Commenced in 1220, the work proceeded stage by stage until finally being completed in 1472. The great west window was painted in 1338 by Master Robert Kettlebarn. Because of the heart shape in the tracery, the window has become known as the Heart of Yorkshire.
Gateways were constructed in the past to bar the way into York and were known as bars. Not far from the cathedral, we came in sight of Bootham Bar, the gateway to the North Road. After having found our way around the city for 1.5 hours, it was time to head back to our coach. The York Motor Museum train was waiting for passengers who were interested in taking a tour of the museum.
Passing by the Yorkshire Gardens, we noted how green the lawns were, and the garden beds were full of colour at this time of the year. The flower beds created a spectacular display with a large variety of many different blooms. We reached the city wall close to the river and zoomed in on a fragment of the original Roman brickwork still remaining. However, these carefully maintained and restored walls are of the medieval times, and there are almost 3 miles of them surrounding the old city. Next to the river, we found Lendal Tower. Dating from 1300, it was originally part of the city defences. In 1677, it was leased to the predecessors of the York Waterworks for 500 years for 1 peppercorn per annum. We could not resist the experience of a walk along this section of the wall as we finally made our way back to the coach.
Shottery, near Stratford-on-Avon, was our first stop next morning, when we stopped for a group photo at a small garden setting opposite Anne Hathaway's cottage. This stop allowed us a few minutes to admire the gardens and the magnificently preserved historical building, with its heavily thatched roof, which was the early home of Shakespeare's wife, Anne Hathaway. The cottage was bought for the nation in 1892.
From there, we moved on to Stratford-on-Avon for lunch and a visit to Shakespeare's birthplace, where he was born in 1564. We spent some time photographing this beautifully preserved old house with its fascinating gables and windows its steep shingled roof and interesting architecture. The house is in Henley Street. It was purchased by public subscription in 1847 and later handed to the care of the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust. The Shakespeare Centre was a more modern building, housing many artefacts, including original bronze Shakespeare medallions designed by Paul Vignese. Behind the centre, we found a herb garden and a flourishing display of red tulips.
Beyond the centre is the Avon River, flowing through a small park. Hiring of river boats seemed to be a great way of relaxing in these tranquil waters. And well-kept gardens bounded the river at this spot. Centred in the park, what could be more appropriate than to find a monument to Shakespeare himself, surrounded with characters of his plays. Hamlet, Lady Macbeth, Falstaff, and Prince Hal. Across the park, a small lock was built into the river. Bystanders watched with interest as a houseboat was waiting to be lowered, ready to pass on downstream. We spent a relaxing half hour in these pleasant garden and river surroundings on Stratford-on-Avon. Then it was time to leave for our next destination.